My parents told me they had planned the perfect surprise for my 30th birthday. They insisted I wear something elegant and promised it would be a night I would never forget. For weeks, my mother smiled every time I asked where we were going. My father simply said, "Trust us." I did. On the evening of my birthday, I arrived at one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. The hostess smiled nervously and led me toward a private banquet hall. I expected balloons, laughter, music, and hugs. Instead, the moment I opened the door, every sound disappeared. Nearly 50 relatives were standing inside. My grandparents. My aunts and uncles. My cousins. Family friends I hadn't seen in years. Not a single person smiled. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. My heart skipped a beat. "What's going on?" I asked, forcing a nervous laugh. "Is this some kind of prank?" Nobody answered. My mother refused to look into my eyes. My father stepped forward with a thick brown folder in his hands. His face looked colder than I had ever seen before. "Happy birthday," he said without emotion. He held the folder toward me. "What is this?" "Open it." My hand started trembling. I slowly opened the folder and found several official documents. The first page carried the logo of a certified genetics laboratory. My eyes immediately landed on two terrifying words. DNA test. I frowned. "This has to be a mistake." "It isn't," my father replied. I scanned the report again and again, hoping I had misunderstood something. Then I saw the conclusion. Probability of biological relationship, 0%. The room started spinning. I don't understand." "You are not our biological daughter," my father said flatly. The words hit me harder than any physical blow ever could. "No. For 30 years, my mother whispered, we believed you were ours." I looked at her, waiting for comfort. Instead, she crossed her arms. My father continued. "A private investigator recently uncovered information about the hospital where you were born. We ordered a DNA test. The results speak for themselves." I laughed nervously. "This isn't funny." "No one is joking." Someone behind me cleared their throat. Another relative looked away. No one defended me. No one even looked surprised. It was as if everyone had known except me. My father pulled another document from the folder. "You inherited our house. You paid for my education. You received money from our family business. You've lived as our daughter for 30 years. He paused before delivering the sentence that shattered everything I believed. "Now that we know the truth, you will return everything." I stared at him. "What?" "Every dollar." I couldn't breathe. "You can't be serious." My mother's voice was calm. "The house keys." "What?" "The keys." Slowly, she stretched out her hand. I said, "Give me the keys." I instinctively stepped back. She walked forward herself, reached into my handbag, and pulled out. The applause faded, but the stranger's smile remained. No one in the room spoke. Even my father, who had seemed so confident only moments earlier, looked unsettled. The man walked toward us with calm, measured steps. He appeared to be in his late 50s, with silver hair, sharp blue eyes, and the kind of confidence that comes from knowing exactly what is about to happen. "Who are you?" my father demanded. The stranger ignored him. Instead, he looked directly at me. "So, this is Emily." Hearing my name from a complete stranger sent a chill through my body. "You know me?" "I know far more about you than you can imagine." My mother stepped between us. "If you're here to cause trouble, you should leave." He laughed quietly. "Oh, Margaret, after 30 years, you still think you control this story." Her face turned pale. "You know my name?" "I know both of yours." He reached into his briefcase and placed another thick folder on the table. This, he said, contains documents your family hoped would never be seen. No one moved. The stranger slowly opened the folder and removed an old photograph. It showed two newborn babies lying side by side in a hospital nursery. One wore a pink bracelet. The other wore a yellow one. He placed the photo in front of everyone. 30 years ago, two girls were born within 20 minutes of each other. My heartbeat grew louder. The hospital made a terrible mistake. The room fell silent again. My father frowned. We already know there was a mix-up. The stranger shook his head. No. You know only half of the truth. He removed another document. The babies were not switched by accident. Several relatives gasped. They were switched deliberately. What? I whispered. There was money involved. My father slammed his hand on the table. That's impossible. Is it? The stranger calmly slid several bank records across the table. Payments were made to two hospital employees the night the babies were born. My mother stared at the papers without touching them. You forged these. I expected you to say that. He smiled again and handed another envelope to my father. Those are certified copies obtained after a court order. My father opened the envelope. As he read the first page, the color drained from his face. His hands began to shake. This? Yes. It can't be. It is. I stepped closer. What does it say? No one answered. The stranger finally looked at me. It says your parents knew about the switch much earlier than they admitted. Every head in the room turned toward my mother. She closed her eyes. Tell her, the stranger said quietly. My father remained frozen. Tell your daughter. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, my mother whispered. We found out, 15 years ago. The word struck harder than the DNA test itself. What? We hired a lawyer. You knew? She nodded without looking at me. For 15 years? Tears filled my eyes. You let me call you Mom every single day. She began CR. The silence inside the banquet hall became unbearable. I looked from my mother to my father, hoping one of them would deny everything. Neither did. The stranger calmly gathered the documents back into his briefcase before removing one final envelope. I believe this belongs to you, Emily. I hesitated before taking it. My name was handwritten across the front in faded blue ink. The paper looked old, very old. What is this? I asked. A letter. From whom? He looked directly into my eyes. Your biological mother. My knees almost gave out. My mother? She wrote it the day you disappeared. The room erupted into whispers. Disappeared? I repeated. Yes. She never abandoned you. I slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a carefully folded letter and a tiny hospital bracelet with my birth date engraved on it. My hands trembled as I unfolded the yellowed paper. To whoever finds my little girl. Tears blurred my vision before I could continue. If you're reading this, then someone finally learned the truth. My daughter was taken from me only hours after she was born. They told me she had died during the night, but I never believed them. A mother knows when her child is alive. I covered my mouth. The stranger spoke softly. Your biological mother spent 30 years searching for you. I looked up in disbelief. She's alive? He nodded. She never stopped looking. My father suddenly stood. This is enough. He pointed toward the door. Leave. The stranger smiled. I will. But first. He placed a small flash drive on the table. Everyone here deserves to know what happened before they judge Emily. My uncle frowned. What's on it? Security recordings. From where? The hospital archives. My father lunged toward the flash drive, but the stranger picked it up first. You've hidden the truth long enough. One of my cousins connected the drive to the restaurant's television. Old black and white footage filled the screen. The timestamp showed the date of my birth. Everyone leaned forward. A nurse entered the nursery carrying 2 newborn babies. She looked around nervously. Seconds later, a man wearing a doctor's coat walked inside. Instead of checking the infants, he switched the identification bracelets. The entire room gasped. Then he handed the nurse a thick white envelope. She opened it. Money. Stacks of cash. No, my mother whispered. The recording continued. The nurse wheeled one baby away. The other remained behind. The stranger paused the video. This was not an accident. It was organized. Every relative stared at my parents. None of them could speak. Then the stranger revealed the final piece of the puzzle. The man in that doctor's coat. He pointed at the frozen image. Wasn't a doctor. Who was he? Someone asked. The stranger took a slow breath. He was your father's business partner. Every eye turned toward my father. His face had become completely white. And for the first time that evening, he looked terrified. No, my father whispered, staring at the frozen image on the screen. That's impossible. The stranger folded his arms. His name was Richard Collins. He wasn't a doctor. He owned 40% of your father's company and owed millions of dollars to dangerous people. The room remained silent. What does that have to do with Emily? My aunt asked. Everything. The stranger walked closer to the television. Emily's biological father, Daniel Carter, had just invented a revolutionary medical technology. Within weeks, investors valued his company at hundreds of millions of dollars. I frowned. My biological father was a businessman? He was an engineer, inventor, and entrepreneur. The stranger nodded. And Richard Collins believed that one day Daniel's daughter would inherit everything. My stomach tightened. So they? Yes. They switched the babies. But why? Because they wanted access to the Carter fortune. A shocked murmur spread through the room. The stranger continued. The original plan was simple. Raise Daniel Carter's daughter as your own. When Daniel eventually found her, your family would gain his trust, and eventually, part of his wealth. I stared at my parents. Is that true? Neither answered. Tell her, the stranger demanded. My father lowered his head. We were young. That's not an answer. We were drowning in debt. His voice cracked. Richard told us it was only temporary. He promised the children would be returned before anyone discovered the truth. And yet 30 years passed, the stranger replied coldly. My mother's tears streamed down her face. It got more complicated. No, the stranger said. You made a choice. Again and again. I felt as though every memory of my childhood was crumbling. Every birthday. Every Christmas. Every family photo. Had it all been built on a lie? Then another question struck me. If I wasn't their daughter? I swallowed hard. Where is their real child? The stranger was silent for several seconds. Finally, he answered. Alive. Everyone looked toward him. But she has no idea who she really is. My father looked up in panic. You found her? Yes. Where is she? The stranger smiled faintly. Closer than you think. Before anyone could ask another question, the banquet hall doors opened once more. A young woman, around my age, stepped inside. She looked nervous, confused, and strangely familiar. Our eyes met. For a moment, it felt as if I were looking into a mirror that reflected a different life. The stranger turned toward her. Come in. She slowly walked into the room. Then he faced everyone. I'd like you all to meet. He paused just long enough for the silence to become unbearable. Your biological daughter. My mother's legs gave out beneath her. She collapsed into a chair, covering her mouth with both hands. The young woman stared at my parents in disbelief. I don't understand, she whispered. Neither did I. Because in that moment, I realized the neg. The young woman stood frozen in the doorway, clutching her purse so tightly that her knuckles turned white. No one spoke. My mother slowly rose from her chair, tears streaming down her face. What is your name?" she whispered. The young woman swallowed. Sarah. Her voice trembled. Sarah Bennett. My father stared at her as though he had seen a ghost. The stranger nodded. Sarah was raised by the Carter family. I looked at Sarah. So. You're the baby who should have grown up with my parents. She nodded silently. And you're the daughter my parents lost 30 years ago. Neither of us knew what to say. It was impossible to hate her. She looked just as frightened as I felt. The stranger continued. Sarah only learned part of the truth 3 weeks ago. Sarah wiped away a tear. My parents always told me I was adopted after a fire destroyed the hospital records. She looked toward my parents. I never imagined this. My mother cautiously stepped forward. I've dreamed about meeting you. Sarah instinctively took a step back. Please don't. The words cut through the room like a knife. You don't get to call yourself my mother. Margaret burst into tears. I know. No, you don't. Sarah's voice became stronger. I grew up wondering why I never looked like anyone in my family. I spent years searching for answers. And now I find out. She pointed toward my parents. That you knew the truth for 15 years. Neither of them could respond. The stranger opened another folder. There is something else everyone needs to hear. My father closed his eyes. Please. Enough. It isn't enough. The stranger placed a small digital recorder on the table. I recovered this from Richard Collins' personal storage unit after his death. He pressed play. Static filled the room. Then Richard's unmistakable voice echoed through the speakers. They'll never tell the girls. They're too afraid of losing the inheritance. Another voice answered. It was my father's. As long as nobody finds out, everything stays exactly as it is. My heart stopped. The recording continued. And if one of the girls starts asking questions? Richard asked. My father's reply was calm. Then we'll pay her to disappear. The recording ended. Silence. Absolute silence. Every relative slowly turned toward my father. Even those who had supported him moments earlier looked horrified. My uncle slammed his fist onto the table. You lied to all of us. My grandmother began crying. How could you keep something like this secret? My father couldn't meet anyone's eyes. Then Sarah looked at me. I don't want your life. I blinked in surprise. She walked closer until we stood face to face. I didn't come here to take your home. I came because I wanted the truth. For the first time that evening, I felt that someone understood exactly what I was feeling. We were both victims. Neither of us had chosen this. The stranger smiled faintly. Now that everyone knows the truth. The stranger placed a worn leather notebook on the table. This belonged to Daniel Carter, he said quietly. Emily's biological father. My heart pounded. You knew him? The man nodded. My name is Michael Hayes. Daniel wasn't just my business partner, he was my best friend. He opened the notebook carefully. Inside were photographs, handwritten notes, and newspaper clippings documenting 3 decades of searching. After the hospital claimed Emily had died, Daniel refused to believe it. He hired investigators, lawyers, and private detectives. He spent millions trying to find his daughter. I felt tears running down my face. He never gave up? Never. Michael turned another page. He celebrated your birthday every year. My breath caught. He bought a birthday cake every July, lit 30 candles over the years, and always made the same wish. What wish? That his little girl was still alive. The room was silent except for quiet sobs. What happened to him? I asked. Michael's expression darkened. 5 years ago, Daniel was diagnosed with an aggressive illness. My heart sank. He knew he was running out of time. So, is he? Michael lowered his head. He passed away 3 years ago. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed by grief for a father I had never met. He never stopped loving you, Michael continued. His final request was simple. He removed a sealed envelope from the notebook. He asked me to deliver this to you the day I finally found you. With trembling hands, I broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter. My dearest Emily. If you're reading this, then my greatest wish has finally come true. I may not be there to hold you, but I need you to know one thing above all else: none of this was your fault. I searched for you every single day. I never replaced you. I never forgot you. I loved you from the moment you were born, and I will love you for all eternity. Tears blurred the words. Please don't let anger define your future. The people who stole our years already took enough from us. Live the life I always dreamed you would have. Be kind, be brave, and never doubt that you were wanted. Love always, Dad. I couldn't hold back my tears. Sarah gently placed a hand on my shoulder. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I looked at her, realizing she had lost the same father who had lovingly raised her, while I had lost the chance to know my own. Michael took a deep breath. There is one final matter Daniel asked me to resolve. He placed a thick legal folder on the table. It concerns his entire estate. My father looked up sharply. What estate? Michael met his gaze without emotion. Everything Daniel Carter owned. He slowly opened the folder. The value of his estate today exceeds. He paused. $1.2 billion. A collective gasp filled the room. But Michael wasn't looking at my parents. He was looking directly at me. And according to Daniel's final will. He slid the first page across the table. There is only. My hands shook as I looked at the first page of the will. At the top, in bold letters, was my full name. Emily Carter. For a moment, the room disappeared around me. I don't want his money, I whispered. Michael Hayes smiled gently. That's exactly why Daniel wanted you to have it. My father suddenly stepped forward. This is ridiculous. She can't inherit a fortune based on an old story. Michael calmly handed him another document. It isn't a story. It's a legally recognized inheritance. The DNA results, the hospital investigation, and the court's findings have already established Emily's identity. My father's shoulders slumped. So, it's over. Yes, Michael replied. For you. My mother burst into tears. We never wanted any of this. I slowly turned toward her. Really? You expected me to hand over my house, my car, and every dollar I had. You told me not to call you Mom. Her lips trembled. I was angry. No. I shook my head. You were afraid. Afraid that once I knew the truth, I would stop loving you. She collapsed into a chair, unable to deny it. Sarah stepped beside me. Emily. I looked at her. I don't want us to become enemies. Neither do I. She smiled sadly. We both lost 30 years. We can't get them back. But maybe. She hesitated. We can decide what happens next. For the first time that evening, I smiled. It was small. Painful. But real. Michael cleared his throat. There is one last surprise. Everyone looked at him. Daniel left instructions that were to be followed only after Emily learned the truth. He pressed a button on a small remote. A large television at the front of the room came to life. A video began playing. Daniel Carter appeared on the screen. He looked older and thinner than in the photographs, but his eyes were warm. If I had ever wondered where I got my smile. Now I knew. He looked directly into the camera. If you're watching this, he said softly, then you finally found your way home. Tears rolled down my face. I wish I could hug you. I wish I could tell you how proud I am. But if life didn't give us that chance. He smiled through his own tears. Don't waste another day living in the past. Forgive when you're ready. Love without fear. And remember, you were never abandoned. You were stolen. The video ended. No one in the room could speak. Even my father silently wiped away a tear. Then Michael closed the folder. There is just one final document left. He placed it gently in front of me. It's the last decision Daniel ever made. I looked down at the title. The Carter Family Foundation. And what I read next would change not only my future, but the lives of thousands of other families forever. I opened the final document with trembling hands. Across the first page, in elegant black lettering, were the words, The Carter Family Foundation. Below the title was a personal note from Daniel. If my daughter is ever found, I ask her to decide how this foundation should serve the world. Wealth has meaning only when it changes lives. I looked at Michael. What does the foundation do? It hasn't done anything yet, he replied. Daniel instructed us to wait until you were found. He believed the only person who should decide its future was you. How much money is in it? Michael took a slow breath. $500 million. The room fell silent. My relatives stared at me in disbelief. Just an hour earlier, they had demanded that I return everything I owned. Now they were looking at the woman who had unexpectedly become responsible for one of the largest charitable foundations in the country. My father lowered his head. We made a terrible mistake. I looked at him for a long moment. A mistake? You planned to throw me out of my home on my birthday. You asked me to repay 30 years of love. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice. He couldn't argue. My mother stepped closer, tears filling her eyes. I know we don't deserve forgiveness. No, I answered quietly. You don't. Her face crumbled. But carrying hatred for the rest of my life won't heal me either. She looked up in surprise. I forgive you. I paused. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. She nodded, understanding exactly what I meant. Michael smiled proudly. Your father hoped you would say something like that. I turned to Sarah. What about you? She sighed. I've spent my whole life wondering where I belonged. She looked around the room. Now I know. And strangely, she smiled through her tears. It's not here. We both laughed softly for the first time that night. Michael reached into his briefcase one last time. There is one final surprise. Everyone looked at him. Daniel also left a video recorded just weeks before he passed away. He inserted another flash drive into the television. The screen lit up. Daniel smiled warmly into the camera. If you've made it this far, he said, then I already know something about you. You chose kindness over revenge. He paused. And that means I chose the right daughter. I covered my mouth, unable to stop crying. I can't give you back the years we lost. But I can give you something else. He smiled. A chance to build a future no one can steal from you. The video faded to black. As the lights came back on, every person in the room realized the same thing. The birthday that had begun as the worst day of my life had become the beginning of an entirely new one. No one moved for several long moments after the screen went dark. The silence felt different now. It was no longer filled with anger. It was filled with reflection. Michael closed Daniel's notebook and looked around the room. "Before we leave, there is one final matter." He handed me a sealed envelope marked confidential. "What is this?" "Daniel asked me not to open it unless you found your biological family." I carefully broke the seal. Inside was a single page. As I began reading, my eyes widened. "What is it?" Sarah asked. I looked at Michael. "It says, my parents never accepted any money from Richard Collins." The room erupted in confusion. "What?" my father exclaimed. Michael nodded. "That's true." "Then why did you let everyone believe we were paid?" "Because the money wasn't what destroyed your family." He looked directly at my parents. "It was fear." My mother covered her face. Michael continued. "Richard offered them money. They refused. But instead of telling the police what they had discovered, they stayed silent. They convinced themselves that exposing the truth would destroy too many lives. And every year that passed made telling the truth even harder." My father began crying openly. "I wanted to tell you so many times." I looked at him quietly. "Then why didn't you?" He couldn't answer. Because there was no answer that could undo 30 years of silence. I folded Daniel's letter and placed it carefully back into the envelope. "I've made my decision." Everyone looked at me. "I will accept my father's inheritance." My relatives exchanged nervous glances. "But not because I want to be rich." I looked toward Sarah. "I want us to build something together." She frowned. "Together?" "Yes. You and I lost the same 30 years. We can't change the past. But we can decide what our future looks like." Tears filled Sarah's eyes. "You'd really want me involved?" I smiled. "You're my sister. We weren't raised together. But from today forward, we'll never be strangers again." Sarah hugged me tightly. Around us, several relatives began crying. Even my grandmother smiled through her tears. Michael quietly picked up his briefcase. "My work here is finished." I stopped him. "No." He turned around. "You spent 30 years keeping a promise to my father." I walked over and embraced him. "Thank you." His voice trembled. "He would have been so proud of you." As he left the restaurant, I realized that one chapter of my life had ended forever. But another, far more meaningful one, was only just beginning. 3 months later, I stood on the stage of a newly renovated children's hospital. Beside me stood Sarah. Behind us was a large sign that read, "The Daniel Carter Foundation, Hope Begins Here." More than 500 guests filled the auditorium. Doctors, nurses, journalists, families, and children whose lives would soon be changed. I looked at the audience and took a deep breath. If someone had told me a year ago that my 30th birthday would destroy everything I believed about my life, I smiled softly. I would never have believed them. The audience listened in complete silence. I lost the family I thought I had. I glanced toward my parents, who were sitting quietly in the last row. They had asked to attend, not as honored guests, but simply as listeners. We all make choices. Some choices last a lifetime. My parents chose fear. My biological father chose hope. I've decided to choose forgiveness. Not because the past had been erased. Not because the pain had disappeared. But because I refused to let hatred define the rest of my life. The audience applauded. Sarah stepped forward. When Emily asked me to help lead this foundation, I didn't know what to say. She smiled at me. We were born on the same day. Our lives were stolen by someone else's greed. But today, we choose to become sisters by choice, not just by blood. the applause grew even louder. Michael Hayes watched proudly from the front row. After the ceremony, my parents slowly approached us. My father looked older than I remembered. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said quietly. "I only wanted to say that I'm sorry." My mother couldn't stop crying. "I loved you every single day, Emily. I was just too afraid to tell the truth." I looked at both of them. "I believe you loved me. And I also believe you made terrible decisions." They nodded. "I can't go back to being your little girl. But I hope one day we can build something honest." It wasn't complete reconciliation. It was a beginning. Months turned into a year. The foundation funded children's hospitals, scholarships, and programs that reunited families separated by trafficking and illegal adoptions. Thousands of lives changed. Every year, on my birthday, Sarah and I visited Daniel Carter's grave together. We brought 2 birthday cakes. One for the father who never stopped searching, and one for the family we had finally found. As we stood there beneath the quiet summer sky, I realized something that changed my life forever. Family is not defined only by blood. It is defined by love, truth, sacrifice, and the people who choose to stand beside you when everything else falls apart. The birthday that began with betrayal ended with healing. The DNA test revealed who I was biologically. But the journey that followed revealed who I truly wanted to become. And that was the greatest gift I had ever received. The end.